Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, Mark Novak, episode 341 after Christmas. Mark, rental payments. This, as we sort of known and we can always see on the books, it can be a big difficult time for everybody and some people with rental payments. And we continually see some good things people do and how they handle it, but also some ways we don't recommend people handle it that they do. So the point of today's show is pass on some experience that we hear across the board and how we can help. Good morning, Frida.
Hey, Frida. Look, yeah, it is. Look, we're managing 4,000 individual tenants, and it's a really, really difficult time of the year because you've got spending, you've got prezzies to buy, you've got holidays that have been taken. Even if you're not going away, some workers are still asking you to take holidays for a week or two, and you've got to get that money to go through all those things. And rent's generally your biggest cost. So at the moment, we find the arrears blows out, and there's good strategies and bad strategies that are out there.
Well, let's go through how the Tenancy Act, the Residential Tenancy Act handles it. Like, what are some key dates for a tenant should automatically be aware of when they can receive it, when they would get handed a termination letter? What are the key Act dates? Is it 10 days late, 14? Is it 5 days? When can they be terminated? I think a lot of people would want to know.
Well, at the moment, COVID's brought upon a lot of change with that sort of legislation there. But generally speaking,
without any COVID.
14 days is sort of the magic number. And not only that, but it actually appears on your ledger. So even if you're disciplined and you pay on that 13th day and you're actually undisciplined because you've been late for 13 days, it does still come up on your ledger. So you've got to be a little bit careful about that.
So is it 14 days you get the letter to terminate and then you're going to be out the next day, or is it you get a letter in 14 days and you've got to be out within 30 days?
Correct. Yeah. So you got to basically you'll get your notice period to move out. You'll be given your required period after 14 days. Plus, there's a bit of postage in there as well. But you've got to you just got to bear in mind that you will get calls, messages, emails prior to that. So there's plenty of warning. Look, you know when your rent's due anyway, yeah? Even without the agent reminding you, you know when your rent's actually due.
Yes, it's more that some people will ignore the agent. They'll see it, the office is calling, or they've got the agent's number, and they'll just bury their head in the sand. And by knowing those dates, if there's basically no communication, that's what's going to happen. You're going to get the termination late. Even if in your mind you're going to pay after 15 days, if there's been no communication on your side, then they've got to the agent's going to follow that sort of the policy there, because you may not be speaking to the agent, but the owner will, because the owner is expecting that money as well. And a lot of the time that rent is covering their mortgage. So they're going to know if it's not in their account, they're going to be calling the agent going, what's going on? And in our experience, the worst comment back the agent can give is, we don't know, because then the owner's like, well, send them a termination. It triggers the most aggressive response from the owners. Keep in mind, it's generally always the owner's instructions. Where, Mark, communication is key. And what type of communication, like that? How can that help the communicating of a tenant? Because don't get me wrong, I'm sure it would be quite embarrassing, not feeling good to say you don't have the funds. 99% of tenants want to pay their rent on time. But as you said,
it's an embarrassing process for, it is, these are hard times. Through COVID, in arrears is hard times. But I think that you've got to realise that you're putting your landlord into that same embarrassment, or you're putting that landlord into that same feeling of not being able to pay bills. So once you're not paying your rent as a tenant, then the landlord's potentially not paying his mortgage. So that communication, or even a bit of a heads up, then people can get prepared. So if you're a tenant and you've lost your job, for instance, before you go into arrears, if you're calling up your agent saying, look, this is my plan, this is what's happening, I may be, and don't forget that the agent's not the adjudicator or the decision maker. The agent's the messenger. So at the end of the day, the agent will convey that to a landlord, and each landlord's different. Some landlords will be very supportive. They've been there before. Some landlords will be zero tolerance. That's their policy. So it really is up to how the landlord wants to deal with that situation. But it all starts with communication.
100%. And it's like anything. If you get caught off guard, it pisses you off a lot more. Because if you think, a lot of people always have the perception landlords have all this money. But and a lot of the time it's probably when a tenant hasn't bought before. And that landlord may have saved up for 10 years for that deposit, only had that deposit, put it all in the property, and then they're on an average wage. So when they're being blindsided without the rental payment, it can cause them to be late, and then it can cause them to be less tolerable. So, but if they've got their heads up over, lost my job, I'll have money in 4 weeks, then the landlord goes, oh, maybe I can ask my parents for money, I can transfer from a separate account, or things like that. It's just that communication is key. And we always see a lot of the time that harder line from a landlord when they get blindsided, like anyone. But you understand a lot of the tenants, they're running around in the background trying to make it so they don't be late. But I think sometimes it's inevitable, but the communication is available there.
Okay. So after 14 days, you're given 14 days to move out. If you pay your rent, can you stay in the property if you catch up?
Yeah, generally the letter of a termination will say, it works two ways. Yes, the answer is yes, because when you pay you've got that stain on your ledger, on your report, but it basically wipes out the default. But then a lot of agents will also say in the letter, partial or full payment, which sort of incentivizes the negotiation, set up a payment plan, because you may be able to pay 80% of the rent, and then next time you can pay an additional 20% and catch up. So that's where the communication will help. Because if you communicate with the agent saying we can pay half now, and in 3 weeks or 2 weeks we'll be able to pay the rest, can you let the owner know it's coming? And then that can sort of pause that termination. A lot of the time the agent may leave, if you've only paid part payment, they leave the termination there, but they don't execute it. Because if you don't fulfill your obligations, which you've said in 2 weeks we'll pay, then it still stands. But my understanding is if it's a full payment, and you've caught up under your lease, then it does void that termination and the future date of vacating.
So I think that's a big one you touched on. Tenants that are out there, if you can get any money towards the landlord, if not necessarily the whole amount, it just shows a good intention as well. It just shows that you are trying, you are having a go. You're on the road to recovery, hopefully, because it's a rolling debt that's getting bigger and bigger. So if you can chisel away at it, really, really important. Now, responsibility for arrears. This is also really important. There may be 2 tenants on the lease, and you may be a great payer and the other tenant is a shocker of a payer. You are as responsible for the rental arrears than the other tenant, right? So you may think that you're not being blemished, but when you sign a lease and you are partnering up with someone on a lease, you are taking on the whole debt yourself if they don't pay. So it's really, really important that the person that you choose to get in bed with your lease is going to be an honourable person with their debts. Yeah,
and it's also, you may say to your head, I'll be able to tell the future landlord it was a roommate, but they're not going to hold much weight to that because it's your responsibility. If anything, they'll judge you just as poorly as the non-rental payment because you're both in it together. You would almost rather, if you can, pay their portion of it and you chase your friend rather than putting your hands up and go, well, I'm just blaming him, the agent can chase him, because it will smear your ledger just as much. Because as much as you may think it's a genuine excuse, it was the other party. A lot of agents looking at an application won't look at it, won't care. Owners don't care. So even though you may think it's a valid excuse, and it may be valid, you may still be working and can just cover it, but he can't. But you will get judged almost as badly as the person non-paying, and if not as badly, because how can you prove it? Unless you go into more detail and show that you are. Otherwise, it's going to be like everyone says that. It was my roommate. It was my roommate. It's the most common excuse we probably hear. So don't hold too much weight on it. See what you guys can work out between you to make it work. Even if you cover 75% and you've covered an extra 25% for him, or start looking for a new roommate.
You know what else? Even just front up. Just turn up to the real estate agent's office and have a chat. I think people these days miss that a little bit. That good old belly to belly conversation.
No email.
Yeah,
no emails.
Not hiding behind emails or even phone calls potentially, but belly to belly, fronting up to the office and saying, "Hey, this is the situation. Can I talk with my property manager?" Have a talk with your property manager. Say, "This is what's happened," and then just sort of work it through. Super important.
And don't
other
send
things
a
that
list.
have we missed on arrears?
Another tip: don't send a list of shit around the apartment that was not fixed as an excuse of not paying rent. For court purposes, they hate that and they penalize you even further. What I see here is like a tenant would be like, send a full email of how shit the place is. This was never fixed. We asked for this. This was never done. And by the way, I can't pay my rent. I'm not paying my rent. The biggest thing due to this. Just be honest. Get on the phone call. Because the reason is, not saying those, like, two wrongs don't make a right. And from our experience, when we get into tribunal, the judge will basically separate the excuse, separate the issues: rental payment, arrears. Rental arrears, and let's say repairs. And they're always like, if you try and use the arrears as an excuse, because the repairs weren't done, they're like, no. Arrears is a financial agreement. You broke it. Don't care about anything else. I'm not basically the repairs don't matter if you're not up to date in rent. Like, that's not coming from the agent or the landlord, where you think that could be a very biased opinion. Of course, you're going to say, if I don't pay my rent, nothing else matters. That basically comes from the courts, and you hear that very often. The owner's wrong does not make a right, equal you can have a wrong. And they're very firm on that, aren't they, Mark? Like, I always hear that from property managers. Yeah,
the tribunal members, they really are diplomats. And look, I know. So basically, guys and girls, if it can't be resolved, or if matters have to be taken further, it ends up going to a tribunal situation, and that's when the tribunal member sits with the tenant, sits with the landlord's representative or the landlord, generally the agent, and then they work out, okay, where's this derailed. When they're there in arrears, you're right. There's not really any tolerance towards that at all. That's probably the number one thing that they're not tolerant about tribunal members.
Correct. That's a wrap. So everyone enjoy your little Chrissy break, and whoever's working, good on you, and we'll be here. We'll be back tomorrow morning. We're going to talk about stamp duty currently and the new stamp duty proposal with our guest accountant, Harry.
That's going to be really interesting. So, and Northern Beaches, good on you. We are okay. We're shrinking the numbers, and it's going to be an interesting New Year's Eve, hey?
Yeah, I think a lot of the restrictions for us on the southern side are until Jan 2, I think they said, and northern side Jan 9. So it'll be interesting. House parties. I suppose they were the best New Year's Eve anyway. So is what it is.
Yeah.
Alrighty, back tomorrow. Cheers.
See you, legend. Cheers, man.